Blake Lively is back in the headlines again, and at this point, it almost feels as if she could have her own dedicated news channel because something new seems to surface every single week. This time, it is not a minor story. It involves more than $2 million in unpaid contractor debt tied to a massive dream compound that she and Ryan Reynolds have reportedly been building in New York for the past 8 years. And according to the public filings now being discussed, some of the workers who helped build it are still waiting to be paid. Before even getting into the compound itself, there is another detail that needs to be addressed first, because it keeps circulating as if it were new. Headlines are still appearing that say Blake Lively did not receive a cent of the $30 million she had been seeking before the settlement. Those pieces are being run like breaking news, but that was already known. Blake's own lawyers confirmed it the same day the settlement was announced. Nobody got paid, nobody signed a non-disclosure agreement, and the whole matter simply dissolved. So when those same headlines reappear weeks later dressed up as fresh information, it feels less like reporting and more like an effort to keep the narrative alive, because Judge Lyman's ruling was such a major moment, and there is now very little left to report on that specific front. Judge Lyman does not appear to be in any hurry. He seems finished with it, focused on other real cases, and Blake's team submitting last-minute filings in an attempt to secure some kind of final victory did not appear to impress him. The signals seemed to be clear enough, he had seen enough, and did not need more papers landing on his desk. There has also been speculation that Blake's lawyers may have filed those late motions partly to shield themselves from a possible malpractice claim. Whether that is true or not remains unknown, but the fact that people are even seriously entertaining that theory says a great deal about how chaotic the entire legal saga has become. It has been a mess for everyone involved. Justin Baldoni spent months absorbing brutal press coverage. Blake took serious damage of her own, and the only people who seem likely to have truly made money from the whole disaster are the lawyers. Now both sides appear to be sitting amid the wreckage, trying to figure out what happens next. The property story, however, is what stands out most sharply now. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds reportedly own a sprawling 110-acre property in Lewisboro, New York, about 60 miles outside the city. For years, they have been turning it into what Blake herself described at a town planning board hearing as heaven. Those were her words. She called it the most beautiful place in the world and spoke about wanting to create an environmentally conscious luxury retreat where the neighbors would never see them, a beautiful buffer for their growing family. That idea becomes even more striking when set beside the fact that they also already own a $5.7 million home only 8 miles away in Pound Ridge. The notion of needing a second private sanctuary as a buffer when there is already a high-end property nearby gives the whole project a distinctly extravagant tone. They reportedly began buying up surrounding parcels around 2018, and the project grew into something enormous. It was not just a house, it was a vast compound, including a main residence, a pool house, a dedicated gym building, a geothermal heating and cooling system, custom copper roofing, structural steel framing, and high-end interior finishes throughout. The scale alone is difficult to ignore. 14,500 square feet. That number is staggering. It is the kind of space most people can barely imagine occupying, let alone maintaining. Yet that is what they were building. The real complication came when the Daily Mail reviewed Westchester County public filings and found that 5 separate contractors and subcontractors had filed mechanics liens against the property in April of this year. Together, those claims total more than $2.1 million in allegedly unpaid work. The largest single claim came from a company called Flowcon, doing business as Flower Construction. That claim alone was around $1.3 million. The others covered specialized work such as custom copper roofing, drainage systems, and additional technical construction elements. The scale of the claims made the story impossible to ignore. What makes the situation even more compelling is the timing. According to the reporting, construction appears to have slowed to a stop sometime in late 2025 or early 2026. At the time this information was published, there was no record in the public filings showing satisfaction or discharge of those liens. In practical terms, that meant the contractors had not yet been paid, at least not in any way formally reflected in the records. Of course, mechanics liens are not judgments. They are claims, not convictions. Projects can stall for many reasons. There can be disputes about workmanship, arguments over scope, legal complications, payment timing issues, or conflicts involving the limited liability company through which a property is held. So none of this proves that Blake and Ryan are financially ruined or intentionally refusing to pay workers. But the optics are undeniably terrible, especially given everything else happening around them. That contrast is what gives the story its force. Blake stood before a planning board in 2022, speaking passionately about how desperate she was to get shovels in the the ground and finally live in what she called heaven. She described the property as the most beautiful place in the world. Yet by late 2025, the dream had apparently stalled, and multi-million-dollar liens were being filed by people trying to collect payment for work already performed. That gap between the fantasy and the reality is sharp enough to make anyone stop and ask what actually happened. What makes it even harder to understand is that Ryan Reynolds is not a man associated with financial strain. Mint Mobile sold for more than $1 billion. Wrexham AFC has become a genuine success in both sports and media. Between the two of them, Blake and Ryan have accumulated very substantial wealth. So the existence of more than $2.1 million in contractor liens on a project that has been under development for 8 years does not immediately suggest financial collapse. But it certainly raises questions. If there is that much money in the background, why are contractors forced to file liens at all? Why has construction stopped? Why is there no public discharge showing the debts were settled? Those are fair questions, and at the moment there are no clear public answers. One possible explanation is that this could be a quality dispute. That happens in construction all the time. A contractor files a lien, and the owner responds by claiming the work was incomplete, defective, or outside the agreed scope. The matter then turns into a prolonged legal and commercial fight that can last months or even years. That could be happening here. But because Blake and Ryan's side has said so little, the silence itself becomes part of the story. When a dispute this specific emerges, and there is no visible explanation, the absence of comment starts to speak loudly. The timing also becomes more interesting when placed in a wider context. There have been reports suggesting Blake and Ryan may be looking to spend more time in Europe, possibly in the United Kingdom, and that there may be another property issue developing overseas. On one side, there is this unfinished New York compound with millions in liens attached to it, and on the other side, there are whispers about yet another property elsewhere. That does not prove anything by itself, but it does contribute to the image of a couple whose relationship with real estate has become increasingly large, expensive, and complicated. What matters most, though, is not whether they are broke. The evidence presented here does not point convincingly to that conclusion. They have too many revenue streams, too many assets, and too much accumulated wealth for $2.1 million to pose an existential threat. The real issue is what this pattern suggests about where they are now. Blake's legal war ended without her receiving any part of the $30 million she was seeking. Their dream compound is unfinished and burdened with unpaid claims. There are reports of strain and pressure on both sides following the lawsuit, and the same press that once seemed eager to flatter Blake and Ryan is now combing through county filings looking for the next unflattering angle. That is a very different place from where they were just a few years ago. What makes that especially striking is how avoidable much of it appears in retrospect. If Blake had simply come forward early in the "it ends with us" controversy and said the marketing approach had been wrong, that she understood the criticism, and that she was sorry, the entire situation might have been contained. Instead, what followed was years of legal warfare, enormous expense, dozens of people dragged into the fight, even fringe corners of media and commentary pulled into discovery, and in the end, there was no real winner. The lawyers got paid. That was about it. And now, long after the central battle has burned out, Blake is still under a microscope, still dealing with fallout, still having her public records examined for signs of the next problem. The scrutiny has not disappeared because the public never got a clean ending. This story also feeds into something much broader happening culturally. People have become deeply tired of a certain kind of celebrity excess. Regular people are dealing with rising costs, economic pressure, and housing markets many cannot enter. Against that backdrop, hearing a major celebrity stand before a planning board and say she desperately needs to begin work on a private 110-acre heaven compound does not land well. Add multiple homes, cross-border property holdings, staff, luxury construction, and workers who appear to be waiting for payment, and the image becomes hard to defend. Even if the underlying details are more complicated, that is the picture created. An image is something Blake, more than most, should understand the value of. Ryan Reynolds continuing to buy property while all of this is happening creates its own kind of mood. At the same time, there are actors who were once recognizable television faces now driving delivery trucks just to make ends meet, because the streaming era destroyed the residual system that once kept working actors afloat. That contrast is sharp, and people feel it. Blake and Ryan appearing at the Met Gala in the middle of all this, looking polished and untouched, lands very differently now from how it might have landed several years ago. The reservoir of goodwill that once softened every impression just is not there anymore. That is really the center of the matter. The compound story is not even primarily about the liens themselves. It is about the fact that Blake and Ryan spent years building a very particular public image. They were the cool, witty, self-aware celebrity couple. Ryan with the Deadpool humor and self-mocking self-mocking social media charm, Blake with the fashion visibility, and the glamorous but somehow still approachable energy. People genuinely liked them, and that likability mattered. It opened doors, protected them from criticism, and encouraged favorable media coverage. But once that image cracked during the legal battle, every new story began passing through the damaged version of it. By itself, the compound dispute might have been a relatively small item. In the context of everything else, it feeds the growing sense that the carefully managed world they built is showing some very real and very human fractures. And that is the brutal truth about narratives. Once they shift, reversing them is extraordinarily difficult. A few years ago, a tabloid probably would not have bothered digging through Westchester County property records in search of trouble attached to Blake Lively. Now they absolutely will, because there is an audience for it. That appetite exists because of the choices Blake made. Not Ryan alone, not their team alone, but Blake herself. The way the "It Ends With Us" press tour unraveled, the way the lawsuit escalated, the way every attempt to answer criticism seemed only to intensify it rather than calm it down, those were decisions. And decisions carry consequences much further than people expect. The legal case may be fading, but the reputational case is still very much open, and it is being argued through every new story that appears. At the same time, there is a legitimate discomfort in watching the media and content creators go this deeply into personal finances and property records. Mechanics' liens are public records. The information is legally accessible, but it is still fair to ask where the line should be between real public interest and simple pile-on behavior. That tension deserves to be acknowledged. It is uncomfortable, yet there is another side to it. Blake Lively is not a private citizen who happened to be dragged unwillingly into the spotlight. She actively used media, public relations, and perception management throughout the entire legal battle. She worked to shape narratives, to plant stories, and to manage public opinion as part of a legal strategy. That is documented. So when the same media ecosystem turns around and starts examining her public filings and property records, it becomes very difficult to argue that she did not help create the exact conditions for this kind of scrutiny. You cannot use the media aggressively when it serves you, and then claim victimhood when the media investigates on the way down. That is part of what makes this moment so revealing. The legal war may have ended, but the drip of fallout will likely continue. The overseas property questions may surface more clearly. The liens on the compound may be resolved quietly, or they may escalate into litigation with contractors, which would create a completely new story. Judge Lyman will eventually issue whatever final ruling remains on his docket, and that will bring another round of coverage. Through all of this, Blake and Ryan will probably remain publicly quiet, likely under instruction from their lawyers, but silence itself becomes part of the narrative. Every week that passes without acknowledgement, without visible resolution, and without any serious attempt to explain what went wrong, only strengthens the impression that they are treating this as a public relations and legal exercise rather than a moment for real self-examination. The saddest part of all this may be what the money itself represents. Both sides in the lawsuit burned extraordinary sums on legal fees over something that, early on, could likely have been addressed with a measure of accountability and an apology. The money that went to lawyers across this conflict could have gone towards something meaningful. Instead, it financed years of litigation that ended with no real victory. Blake did not get the $30 million she wanted. Justin spent years under the weight of accusations that harmed him personally and professionally. The production, the cast, the crew, and everyone connected to "It Ends With Us" got dragged into a mess that overshadowed what should have been a straightforward film promotion cycle. All of it happened because nobody wanted to be the first to step back. That may be the true legacy here. Not the settlement figure, not Judge Lyman's docket, not even the liens themselves. The real lesson is that ego is expensive and pride is expensive. Choosing war where peace was still possible costs far more than the original disagreement ever required. Blake Lively will remain wealthy. Ryan Reynolds will keep expanding his business ventures, making his Deadpool jokes, and buying property. They will land somewhere. But the version of them that existed before all of this, the untouchable golden couple the internet genuinely rooted for, is gone. No amount of money, no fashion appearance, no carefully staged candid photograph can restore that version once trust has broken. That is the most human part of the whole story. Beneath the mansions, the legal filings, the contractor liens, the planning board hearings, and the private heaven language, there are simply two people who made a series of bad decisions, burned through money and goodwill, and now have to live with the fact that some things cannot be purchased back once lost. Reputation is one of those things. That is where Blake Lively stands now. The legal chapter is closing, but the story very clearly is not.